This is KossTalk with Evan Kossman, and you are listening to episode 11. This week on the podcast we have
Robbie Goldfarb,
who has a couple different jobs. We'll get into all of them and more, but I wanted to start at the beginning. I guess not even the beginning, because we have another beginning before this beginning. I wanted to get into comp sci at Western because you took a double major in medical sciences and computer sciences.
Sure.
But we were both in the same comp sci program at Western. So I just want to start, what did you think about the program?
Yeah, so I think the one obvious point about comp sci at Western is that it's a smaller program, right? And so I think there are obviously pros and cons to that. In my experience there, I'd say the con, and especially looking back now, having now been introduced to many people from, Waterloo, U of T, and schools in the States, I think there was a lack of real world experiences. I think that, constant class doesn't necessarily prepare you for what you're going to be doing in the real world. In fact, most of what I do today and since school were things that I actually learned on the side. And I think that, looking at people coming from programs with a co-op, they have a lot more context. And so I think that's something very valuable. On the flip side, being in a smaller program, there's opportunity within that. There's opportunity to succeed. There's opportunity to sort of achieve things that you may or may not have been able to do otherwise.
It's funny that you bring up that there were some droughts of real world experience, because I found that a lot of the stuff they taught me definitely doesn't apply. Like, I don't think I need to learn machine learning for what I was doing now and everything like that. I just think it needs to be updated.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I agree with that to some extent. I also disagree in certain ways. So in many ways, university, even beyond comp sci, is learning a lot of very sort of fundamental abstracted type concepts that are often hard to apply. And I think there needs to be a balance there. And I'll tell you what I mean. So in comp sci specifically, a lot of what you learn around understanding, complexity, and performance, and really how operations run and are executed, especially at the operating system, at the level of the operating system. Although you might not be applying that on a day-to-day, it gives so much context when you are thinking about everyday problems at the workplace. And really, that's in many ways one of the things that I find differentiates people who I've worked with who come from a university background versus, let's say an online coding school. Having that deeper understanding helps you, I think, make better decisions when it comes to really sort of complex situations.
I never thought about it as the fact that I needed the background information to get me to understand the front end learning. But now that I think about it, it's good to have both sides. And so you can communicate properly between all things, or understand everything rather.
Yeah. And it's a balance, right? I mean, if you don't want to spend all day, every day studying things that are, at such a high level that you're not going to be able to use it. And I think it's also, especially in computer science, those high level sort of difficult concepts, or concepts that are harder to sort of, bring close to home, tend to turn people off of computer science. Comp sci and programming and tech in general is sort of regarded as this, by people who aren't in that world, as this sort of very foreign space, when in reality it's actually not, right? I think there are things that we can do to bring it closer to home and make it more relatable and more understandable. And I think, to your point, having more of the curriculum be tied to everyday, things you're actually going to be doing, things you sort of get and you say, okay, I see how I can use this. I think that could go a long way.
It's definitely taken a step in being more modern in how a lot of people are understanding the role of comp sci in today's marketplace.
Yeah.
But it's also definitely a couple of steps behind, because, like, for example, Western, when I was there, they didn't offer something like iOS programming or modern language programming compared to, like, when I took my semesters at Laurier, they offered that because they wanted to be more modern. They would be working closely with Waterloo, and they wanted to be ahead of the curve. It obviously depends on the program that you're in, but at the same time, it's good that schools are making somewhat of an effort to get modern in that way.
Yeah.
So what drew you to CompSci?
So it drew me to CompSci. So I first formally got involved in tech and programming in grade 11. I took a CompSci, or I don't even know if it was computer. I forget what it was called. I took a programming languages course, and I enjoyed it a lot. And over time, throughout that year, I found it to be a creative outlet for me. So similar to the way, guitar or writing music is, it was very much something that excited me and was sort of an outlet to explore and do all sorts of fancy things. And when I actually first went to university, I didn't originally take computer science. I was taking a full honors in physiology and pharmacology and medical science. But as I got involved in sort of some of my side businesses, I slowly started to realize, maybe this is something I should do full time. And so that was the point where I switched to a double major. And that's where I started, to my point earlier, that's where I started to build a lot more context around my programming and my programming decisions. And I think as much as I don't know how often I actually applied the things I learned in computer science, I think they did make me a better programmer.
Yeah, well, hopefully going through a program like that, you learn a couple things that help in that way.
At least one or two.
So let's talk about those side businesses that you're doing before and even in school. Yeah. One of the main ones was Bravada. So can you talk about what that was?
Yeah, for sure. So Bravada is a customer feedback tool. Bravada has changed a lot over the now 4 or 5 years that I've been working on it on the side. And I mean, we're still collecting customer feedback for businesses, but our focus has definitely shifted to from being more of a survey tool to a strategic tool that helps businesses make more high-level decisions and, actually use their customers to understand their business objectives and how they're performing, as opposed to trying to answer a quick question.
When you're making that focus shift, how do you know when it's the right time and to not abandon the first part, but to maybe pivot to something else?
Well, so in my experience with Bravada, I had a couple types of pivots. There were pivots that were bad pivots and pivots that were good pivots. And I think the difference for me, when there are periods of time where you're not doing a lot, where things are relatively stagnant, which will come up if you're working on something on the side, which I was, pivoting is a very appealing option because it's an easy way to sort of shift things up and change things. And that's not the right reason to make a pivot. I think another wrong reason is not listening to the market and listening to your customers. I found, especially with my experience with Bravada, as well as in other experiences, that it's very easy to tell yourself you're listening to your customers, but it's a lot harder to actually listen to your customers. It's very easy to talk to one person or two person and hear what you want to hear, or maybe kind of hear what you want to hear and shift it. But it's a lot harder to really do the research. And I think when you really do the research and you really know that, I figured something out that makes sense, I think if you don't have to keep reminding yourself that, oh, this is a good idea, or, oh, I did my research, then it's probably the right move.
No, you definitely don't want to stay complacent with what you're doing just because it's doing okay. You want to get to something better. So what did you learn from those bad pivots that you mentioned that helped you with knowing that the good pivots were the right pivots?
Yeah, I mean, I think I learned a lot of very specific things here and there. I learned that, I learned a lot about how to build a UI that makes people excited. I learned a lot about what types of information actually matter to people. But I think more than anything, I learned that you have to really understand your surroundings, and you really have to understand the people that you want to use your product. Because like I said, I mean, it's so easy to pull something out of your butt and just try and do it. But it's a lot harder to really figure out the right thing. It's a lot more frustrating. But I learned that it's worth it, and I think important to take the time to do that.
So how did you define the ideal client?
In many ways, what we did was almost more the reverse. And whether or not this is the right decision, I can't really speak to. But I think what we did was we focused a lot on the market. And we focused a lot on where the gaps were. We focused a lot on what we were doing wrong and why people who didn't like our product didn't like our product. And we designed a product around that and then tried to understand, who could this product be useful for. Now, the nice thing about that was we've been able to continue to iterate and move towards a product that is exciting and unique. And people sort of raise their eyebrows at it, which is so important when you're, especially when you're young and doing something on the side. But the flip side is it took us a lot more time to figure out who our target was. And then when we did figure out, as we have begun to more clearly define who our target is, there's shifting that's required. So, in many ways, I think that it was a good decision because we were able to identify something that was unique and something that was very powerful. But it probably wasn't the most agile approach to developing a business.
Let's take a quick break from the interview with Robbie to just update you on the current state of the podcast. Those of you listening to this on Facebook will notice we changed podcast hosts. It was time I decided I actually invest in this podcast if I was going to commit. So we officially swapped hosts. This episode with Robbie was put on both the old and new host as I set up the final transfer for future episodes. For those of you wondering if this affects your subscription, do not worry. Everything happens on the back end. If you're subscribed on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or directly from the feed, you won't even notice in the next episode. The next thing I want to talk to you about is the Facebook and Twitter pages. I feel like I've been misusing these since I started the podcast. These are supposed to be outlets where I connect with you, the listeners, beyond just posting the weekly content. So if you would be so kind to give us a like on the KossTalk Facebook page and a follow on the KossTalk Twitter, you'll find an open discussion about a bunch of topics including sports, business, life goals, and everything else I can think of. I put up a couple of polls this week and I was really excited to see the engagement. We are also going to be giving facelifts to the respective pages, so be on the lookout for that. Finally, the point I try to hammer home each episode. The path to making this podcast successful is a marathon, not a sprint. I realize that it will take a lot of time. I've been thrilled with the number of streams and downloads of the episodes so far, and I'm not disparaging any part of that, but I know there's a capacity for so much more. It feeds into the reason why I switched audio hosts, because I know it is for the betterment of the podcast. I'm appreciative of everything that has happened so far, and especially to those of you who have taken the time to actually leave a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. I cannot stress enough how important it is for you to do this, as it really helps with the visibility and lifeblood of the podcast for future episodes. I'm going to start a segment in future episodes where I give a shout out to those of you who take the time to write a review. Maybe even read a couple. I dislike asking as much as the next podcaster, but if you could take a minute and leave a 5-star review, it goes a long way, more than you can even imagine. Now, back to the interview with Robbie. So how did you get the idea for Bravada?
So I got the idea. So I mentioned I took my first programming course in grade 11. And so I started a few small businesses on the side throughout grade 12 and first year university. I started one called panel.com, which was this almost comical attempt to redefine the dictionary and sort of crowdsource the English dictionary, almost like a combination of Wikipedia and there's Urban Dictionary.
I was going to say, that's what it reminds me of, yeah.
Yeah, so a few different things. What it actually ended up being was almost the exact same as what Reddit is now. Became like almost these discussions around different concepts or words. And this was way before, it was before I knew what Reddit was, but I'm sure it existed. But yeah, so I started a few things, and as I kept sort of moving from one thing to the next, and I started getting more familiar with programming and specifically web programming, which that experience, that's what that gave to me. It was really, it opened my eyes to the possibilities of the web. I got very excited about that. And so I was specifically really excited about the flexibility of the web. Specifically the fact that, you can within minutes get something up on the internet and share it with someone halfway around the world. And so I thought that was really cool. And so I almost worked backwards and I said, how can I use this? And sort of the first thing that came to mind was I want to be able to get feedback on these things that I'm working on. Why don't I make something that can do that? Because the web, is the best way to do that. Like I found myself always jumping through hoops to try and get people to come over or get on the phone or take a look at this. And then you had to screen share or, go over to their place and show them. And so the thought was, this is what the web solves. And so I just built this website where, anyone could sign up and you could create a page. And then you could share that page, which is, fundamentally what the internet is. And so I just built something around that and went from there.
Oh, awesome. So you basically built it as a way to get feedback on your ideas, and then it sort of built into feedback on other people's ideas at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was something that I really wanted, and nothing out there was really doing it for me, mostly because everything was very tedious. So a lot of what Bravada was initially built around was this concept of one-tap feedback and being super quick. And it was in that way. We were able to get very high response rates, much higher than we would have through, other survey tools. And so for me, it was great. The first time I think I really used Bravada was to get feedback on Bravada. I got a ton of information very, very quickly. So
you didn't like the options that were given to you, so the best way to do it is just to build something yourself, basically.
Yeah, no, for sure.
That's funny that you use Bravada to get the feedback from Bravada. So when did you realize that you were actually onto something? Just when you started getting responses on Bravada?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it never really was a real thing until we got our first business using it. I mean, it was cool to see people responding, but to be fair, a lot of these people were people I knew, either directly or indirectly. What I did is I got a few guys who were sort of willing to work as a commission sales position. And they went out. We were in London, and I think the first day they went out, they each made like a couple sales, and I was like, wow, this is cool.
So they got you your first sales, or you were able to get your first one and then you started bringing people in? Sorry.
No, so I had gotten a number of businesses using it for free.
Oh.
And then at that point, I was working with these clients. I was actually building the software. And then I was trying to, actually try and pull a business plan together and everything. And so what I did is I said, why am I, wasting my time? Why don't I just ask some people if they want to go try and sell this? If they do, I'll give them, whatever percent. And I more just figured, why the hell not? Just try it.
And also, why give something away for free if people are actually willing to pay for it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that there are two sides to that. I think what I found with people who were using it for free is ultimately it's easier to get them to use it. Right? It's obviously easier to give something to someone than to make them pay for it. But on the flip side, we got much more, and I found this still today in other businesses as well. You get much better feedback from people who are willing to pay for it because they have skin in the game and they care. When you give something to someone for free, they don't feel that sort of onus to make this work. And so they're much more reluctant to work with you.
No, for sure. They might test it out and then never use it again. But if someone's paying for it, they're committed. They're actually
they got to get their money's worth. And so they're going to work with you to make sure that they do that.
So I want to go back to the thing you talked about before. How hard was it to convince that first company to join in? Or was it because it was free? They're like, oh, we'll try this out and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, we were in London. It was a lot of these small retail and restaurant chains that were, in the student core. So honestly, that part wasn't too bad. Things got trickier when we moved back to Toronto and we tried to, work with bigger businesses. That's where things got more difficult. But in a friendly small town, people, at least for free, were willing to do us a favor. And even, when some of these restaurants heard there's, a local student startup trying to get something going, they were happy to put some money in.
That's really cool, actually, that the small town approach actually helped the business in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, right? Because it's a small town. None of these businesses were chains. The owners were not necessarily as well connected as some of the owners are in Toronto. So there was sort of a limit to what we could do there, and a limit to how far our efforts there could go. But it certainly was an easy launch pad.
So what were the hardest parts about juggling this venture, the other ventures you had your foot in, and school at the same time?
I mean, the hardest part is prioritization, right? And I think, the solution I found to that was organization. And I would and still do spend up to 30 minutes a day just organizing my own personal backlog. What are my priorities? Like, not just at work, not just at home in life. What are the things? And I will reorder them and I'll think about them and I'll, put together a plan to address them. If I didn't have that, there's no way I'd be able to do that. Cause it's tricky. Cause it's tricky to sort of look at so many different things, especially, when I was doing business and school and, that are so different. And so it's actually, it's a lot of work, and it should be a lot of work to really consider your approach. So I think the hardest part was just nailing down those priorities and how I wanted to work on things. But I put time into that, and I think that was worth it.
No, for sure, because it leads to you where you are now. And speaking of now, you're working at Top Hat. In what capacity?
So I am currently working at Top Hat as a product manager.
And what does that entail?
So what is a product manager? So it's a great question, and a lot of people ask me that all the time. It is not a project manager. It's a different thing. A product manager, if I had to sum it up in one line, is you are like the CEO of a small part of the company or one product of the company. What it actually means is a number of different things. And I think it varies a lot depending on the organization you're in. But you are essentially the interface between the rest of the company and the rest of the world and the actual product. So you're the interface between the engineers building it, and the people saying what to build. And so a lot of what product management is prioritization as well, like we were just talking about. So it's being able to synthesize, market data. What are the competitors doing? Information from your customers, from all your internal stakeholders. What does sales want? What does client services want? And being able to figure out, what is going to move the needle. I think that, a good product manager is exactly that, is someone who is going to move the needle. You can waste a lot of time if you don't have a product manager or you don't have a good product manager. You can work on the wrong thing. There's nothing more expensive than doing the wrong thing, because you're wasting time and you're wasting money. So that's the job of product management.
So how did you get started at Top Hat?
So I interviewed with Top Hat about halfway through my 4th year of university, and they offered me a job. I had met with Mike, the CEO, and a couple of the other upper level managers there, and they struck me as a very hungry company with a lot of opportunity, and that's very much what they've proven to be throughout my time there.
What did you see in that hunger?
Yeah, I mean, so Top Hat, I think they, in my conversations and in my early sort of first little bit there, it became very obvious that they were very willing to adapt and do what it takes to make things happen. And whether that meant slightly shifting up the plan or the approach, or just putting in the extra hours, the whole team and everyone in the organization was willing to sort of do what it takes to continue to push to that next level.
So what is it that Top Hat actually does?
So Top Hat was traditionally a classroom engagement tool. So the idea is it's a software replacement for in-class clickers like the iClicker. since I've started there, it started to shift into more of a complete learning and teaching platform. Specifically, what the project I picked up was what we're calling the content project. And the idea behind the content project is we built this really cool platform in Top Hat. Now people are creating so much stuff inside it, so questions and textbooks and things like that. Let's actually start building a marketplace and a community around the content inside Top Hat. And there's obviously so much more money in content than there is in just selling a clicker platform. And I think for comparison, the first year organic chemistry textbook market alone is bigger than the entire classroom engagement market. So when I started there in that project, we started by building out the textbook editor and a textbook tool, and then eventually actually building a marketplace, just so that there was the infrastructure to support a content marketplace.
So what happens within the content marketplace? How do the students and teachers, I guess, interact within that?
So the idea is, primarily what we're selling in the content marketplace are textbooks, and that's very much what Top Hat is intending to do, is to disrupt the textbook market and to essentially replace the publishers. So similar to what companies like Airbnb and Uber have done in their industries by cutting out the sort of evil middleman, we're doing essentially the same thing with textbooks. And so the way it works is professors can sign up for Top Hat, and they can build their own textbooks. They can then make those available for other professors to adopt, and then deliver to their students, or for other professors to join them and collaborate. So it's sort of this marketplace where professors are creating the content, they're collaborating on the content, and then they're ultimately selling it to either their own or other students.
And through that collaboration, they can even make the product better, basically.
That's exactly the idea, right? So with a traditional print textbook, you're gonna deliver a new edition every year or couple of years, and even in that case you're only going to have the editing team that works on it in those increments. In the case of the Top Hat marketplace, you have huge communities of professors all looking to improve this same textbook and being able to do that in real time. So when if there are 300 professors on a chemistry textbook and one professor says, hey, I think this can be explained better, or hey, maybe there's a mistake here, they can fix that, and all the professors and their students get the improvements immediately.
As opposed to waiting till the next semester when they get the new textbook and everything.
As opposed to waiting to the next semester, or maybe even 2 years or 4 years, it would depend. But yeah, it's certainly a lot quicker.
Pluto won't be a planet in most of those textbooks.
Yeah, exactly. That's the idea.
So you made the jump from a full stack developer. What made you say you wanted to get away from that and become a product manager?
So I think, like I was telling you earlier, there's traditionally this separation between engineering organizations and product organizations, or the rest of the business, in that engineers are very much focused on scalability and future-proofing the product and making the right decisions, whereas the business tends to lean towards getting to market, getting something out the door, being able to test something and iterating. And I did find that to some extent, at a few of the places, a few of the projects I've been involved in until now. And I think to me that was actually an opportunity. And I think that the right way to do it is to really be in the middle of those two things. I don't think the product or engineering should lean one way or the other. I think that what a product manager should do, or has the opportunity to do, is to really mend those things and to really understand what are the scalability issues. When is it worth taking out tech debt and when is it not? And to align that with the objectives of the business and where you want to go and what the timelines are. And so that excited me. And I think, in many ways, that's what you have to do as a CEO. And so I had some of that experience working on my own projects before Top Hat. And so it seemed like it makes sense.
Can you talk about any of the things that you think specifically you learned in past experiences helped you in your experience with Top Hat?
Things I learned in past experiences that helped with my experience with Top Hat. Yeah, I mean, well, so one thing for sure is, like I was alluding to earlier, listening to your customers. You know, it is so easy to pretend to listen to your customers, but it's so much harder to actually do it and to actually really get knee deep, understand, you know, what's going on. And I think, you know, it was incredibly important for Top Hat, because I was thrown into a product that, you know, was not being used by 4 or 5 people, but was being used by hundreds of thousands of people. And so what 1 or 2 people have to say could easily be useless. And so, and I got that, you know, from Bravada, and from some other experiences. I think another thing was the understanding the importance of communication. Communication, I think, is probably the most important thing, likely in any position, especially in product management, as well as, you know, being an entrepreneur. I realized very quickly when I was working on my own projects that you could have brilliant ideas in your head and this beautiful vision, but if you can't spit it out in a way that people can understand and relate to, it's worthless. So you are really only as good as what you can get out of your head. And I think that was a lot of what I worked on before coming to Top Hat. And then actually, you know, working as a product manager at Top Hat, that's so much of what you need to do, because it's not just having the ideas, it's communicating it. And it's especially hard in a bigger organization, because you're not just communicating it to, you know, one potential investor or one partner or a small team. You're communicating it across multiple departments, to different stakeholders and customers. And so it's been so important in my everyday work there. And I think that that's something that, you know, I wouldn't have known had I gone straight from university without any side experience.
No, that's definitely the hardest part, where even though you convince yourself every idea you have is great, you need to convince the other people that it is. And as you mentioned before, and that's the hardest part. That's what this podcast is. I made it for myself, and it's just hard convincing other people that it's as great as I think it is. Okay, so to end every episode, I have my guests ask the next guest a question.
Sure.
So your question comes from Mike Belkin, last week's guest, a Tennis Canadian Hall of Famer. His question to you was,
what is your motivation in your work? What drives you? Is it love of what you do, or is it for the money?
Yeah, I mean, I do my job. I do everything I do for myself. And I think what I mean by that is that, you know, myself and everyone are so incredibly unique. You know, everyone has their own strengths and has their own weaknesses, and the way I interpret that is everyone has something unique to offer. And so for me, what sort of drives me is every day better understanding what my strengths are and what my weaknesses are, and getting closer to understanding what can my unique contribution be. And that's what drives me, wanting to make my own unique contribution.
To the world, and also to the business?
To society, to the world, to the business. Yeah.
And do you have a question for our next guest?
I do have a question for the next guest. This is a question I've asked some people this before, and I always get very interesting answers. I always learn a lot from this question, which is the reason I chose to ask it. So, if you could, in one discrete, so not obvious, but one discrete way, make sure a business you're running is going to fail, what would that be?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Now let me follow this up. Is it in case it's going poorly, or if it's going well but you're not happy with it? Why do you create that?
No, I think it's more about like, obviously the reason I say discrete is because, like, obviously how can you make a business fail? You can just do nothing. Or you can throw all your money in the toilet. What I find more interesting is what are decisions that may even seem like normal decisions, or actions that you can do that might not be totally notable, but are surefire ways to make sure things don't work out. Everyone always talks about, you know, what are the secrets to making it work out, and I think it's interesting to think about What are the secrets to make it not work out? Because there's a lot you can learn from that.
No, great question. I'm excited to hear the answer.
Yeah,
All right,
so
Robbie, thank you for being on the podcast.